I was on my way to the meeting about my daughter's inheritance. A meeting that felt less like a formality and more like a battlefield where unseen enemies were waiting. My heart carried the weight of years of promises made, of mistakes, buried under silence, of choices that had rippled through time until they reached this very morning. I remember the way the morning air felt. Heavy, almost charged, as though the world itself knew something was about to shift. The sky was a pale gray, with clouds that threatened to break open, and for a moment, I wondered if they mirrored the storm that was gathering inside me. My fingers brushed the stack of documents I had placed neatly on the passenger seat, legal papers. Old letters, notes, scribbled in the margins of notebooks that had belonged to my late husband. Pages that whispered of secrets, of money unaccounted for, of names I wished I could forget. As I reached for the car door, I could hear the faint creak of its hinge, the sound echoing louder in my mind than it should have. My pulse quickened. Every step toward that meeting felt like stepping closer to something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. I told myself I was strong enough. I told myself I had survived worse. But deep down, I knew this was different. The moment I lowered myself into the driver's seat, that fragile illusion of control shattered. I felt it before I saw Ida presence. A shift in the air. My breath caught, and when I turned, there he was, my neighbor, standing far too close, leaning toward the window with a look in his eyes that froze me where I sat. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't waving like neighbors usually do. His expression was sharp, urgent, and beneath it all, I sensed fear. Real fear. The kind of fear that doesn't belong to gossip or idle chatter, but to someone who has seen too much and carries the burden of knowing. I rolled the window down slightly, my hand hesitant, and his face drew closer. His eyes darted across the street, scanning shadows as if making sure we weren't being watched. That's when I realized this wasn't just a neighborly visit. This wasn't chance. He had been waiting for me, watching, timing his moment perfectly. And then he spoke. His voice was low, rough, like gravel being dragged across stone. Not casual, not kind. There was urgency in every syllable. The words he whispered made my stomach twist, as though the ground beneath me had been yanked away. I comprehended at first. My mind tried to deny what I was hearing, tried to rewrite his words into something ordinary. But they weren't ordinary. They were the kind of words that change the way you look at your family, your friends, even yourself. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles bleaching white, while his voice poured into the small space between us. My neighbor wasn't simply warning me. He was delivering something darker, heavier, something that sounded more like a confession than advice. And with each word, I felt myself being pulled into a labyrinth I wasn't sure I could escape. From my thoughts raced. What did he know about my daughter's inheritance? How did he know it all? Why now, why here, in this fragile moment between departure and decision? The questions collided inside me, each one more terrifying than the last. Because if he knew, then others knew. And if others knew, then the inheritance wasn't just a matter of papers and signatures. It was a matter of survival. The silence between his sentences was worse than the words themselves. It pressed down on me, suffocating, demanding that I choose to listen, to believe, or to drive away and pretend nothing had been said. But I couldn't move. I couldn't leave. I was caught in that moment, suspended between fear and truth, knowing that whichever path I chose would determine everything that came next. And yet, a part of me, small but unshakable, wanted to know, needed to know, because secrets don't vanish when ignored. They grow, they fester, and sooner or later, they come to collect their due. So I sat there, my heart pounding, my breath uneven, staring into the eyes of a man who should have been nothing more than a neighbor, but who, in that moment, became the keeper of something I couldn't escape. And if you've ever felt it that sharp, icy edge of knowing your life is about to change before the words even finish leaving someone's ace, Lips will understand why I stayed, why I listened, why I couldn't turn the key and drive away, because what my neighbor told me that morning didn't just change the meeting I was headed to. It changed everything I thought I knew about my daughter, my family, and myself. Asterisk his. Words spilled into the morning air like poison, and for a moment, I wished I hadn't heard them. I wished I had turned the key, started the engine, and drowned his voice beneath the roar of the car. But I didn't. I stayed, frozen, because the first thing he said was my daughter's name, not in passing, not in a casual, friendly tone. He said it like it was a secret, like the syllables themselves carried a weight too heavy for daylight. And when he spoke it, his eyes didn't meet mine. They looked past me, over my shoulder, like he feared something, or someone. Was standing just behind? She isn't safe, he whispered. Those 3 words, they struck me harder than any insult, any betrayal, any rumor I had ever heard. They cut through me with the precision of a blade, leaving me breathless. My daughter isn't safe. Safe from what? From who? I tried to speak, but my voice betrayed me, trembling with a fear I didn't want him to hear. What do you mean? The words scraped out, thin and fragile, as though they could collapse under the weight of the answer. He glanced toward the street again, scanning shadows, scanning windows, before leaning closer. His breath carried the faint scent of tobacco and sleepless nights. His hand gripped the edge of my car window tighter. His voice dropped even lower. They're watching. Her, he said. The silence that followed was unbearable. My chest rose and fell in shallow bursts, my mind racing through every possibility: jealous friends, vengeful strangers, relatives with greedy hands reaching for her inheritance. The possibilities tangled together until I couldn't separate. Them, who were they? And why would anyone be watching her? I shook my head, almost laughing, though it sounded hollow, broken. This doesn't make sense. You must be mistaken. But even as I said it, my body betrayed me because, deep inside, I knew something had been wrong for months. My daughter's sudden silences during phone calls. The way she glanced over her shoulder when we walked together, the letters that came without a return address. I had dismissed them all as paranoia. Until now, my neighbor's eyes finally locked. With mine, for the first time, I saw no fear, only pity. And that was worse, because pity meant truth. Pity meant he believed there was no escaping what was coming. There after the inheritance, Key said, his voice cracking with urgency. And if she walks into that meeting today, she won't walk out the same. The words hung between us, heavy, impossible to ignore. My grip on the steering wheel loosened, and I felt the tremor run through my fingers. My throat burned with the urge to demand answers, but the look in his eyes stopped me. This wasn't just warning, this was a plea. He wanted me to act, to change the course of something already in motion. And suddenly, wasn't sure if I was on my way to a meeting or on my way into a trap. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs, faster and faster. As though it knew before I did that this day would not end the way I had imagined, because the neighbor wasn't finished. His words so far were only the beginning, and what came next would pull me into a storm I could never have prepared for. I stared at him, my neighbor who suddenly felt like a stranger, and the street around us seemed to fade. The sound of distant cars, the soft rustle of morning wind through the trees, all of it became a dull hum. Because the only thing that mattered now were the words he had spoken. There after the inheritance. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my pulse unsteady. Who are they? I asked, but my voice didn't sound like my own. It was thinner, smaller. The voice of someone who already feared the answer. He didn't respond immediately. He glanced behind him again, as though even the shadows had ears. His hesitation made it worse, 'cause hesitation meant danger was real. And finally, when he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Not everyone in that room today is there for your daughter's future, he said. Some of them are there to take it from her. To take everything. His words slammed into me, heavy and sharp, and I felt my stomach tighten. I thought of the lawyers, the distant relatives, the so-called family friends who had suddenly reappeared in our lives the moment the inheritance was mentioned. Faces I had convinced myself were harmless, just curious, just opportunistic. But no, this was bigger. This was darker. My mind flashed back to nights when I caught my daughter staring at her phone. Her face pale, her fingers trembling. The arguments she avoided, the letters she crumpled before I could read. I thought she was simply overwhelmed. But now I saw it differently. Maybe she hadn't wanted me to see. Maybe she knew something. They're watching her. He repeated, his tone firmer now, more insistent. And if she signs those papers today, if she steps into that room without knowing the truth, it won't just be money they take. It will be control. Over her, over you, over everything that's left of your family. Control. The word twisted in my chest like a blade. Because inheritance wasn't only numbers on a page, was property. Businesses, influence, the kind of legacy people would sell their souls. For my late husband had left behind more than I realized, more than I had been told. And now I understood why every eye seemed to linger on my daughter when she walked into a room. She wasn't just a young woman anymore. She was a target. I shook my head slowly, refusing to let panic consume me. You're saying? Someone at that meeting, someone I've trusted, is working against us. My neighbor's gaze hardened. His silence was the only confirmation I needed. He didn't have to say yes. The truth was already written in the lines of his face. I sat back in the seat, the leather cold against my skin, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Betrayal has a way of stealing the air from your lungs. Before it steals anything else, they'll smile, he added softly. They'll nod, they'll speak like friends. But every word, every gesture will be a step toward trapping her. And once the ink is dry, there's no undoing it. My mind reeled. I pictured the polished table where the meeting would take place, the gleaming folders lined up neatly, the pens waiting like weapons, and around that table faces I had known for years. People who had shared dinners with us, who had toasted at family celebrations. And now, according to my neighbor, they were nothing more than predators in tailored suits. I clenched my fists, a surge of anger cutting through the fear. I wanted to demand names. I wanted to know exactly who was plotting, who was watching, who was waiting to strip my daughter of everything that was rightfully hers. But before I could ask, he leaned closer still, so close I could see the faint scar along his jaw. The years etched into his tired eyes. You'll know them, he whispered. The moment you sit at that table, you'll feel it, the shift, the cold. You'll see the hunger in their eyes. I trembled, caught between disbelief and a dawning, terrible realization. I had felt it before, at the last family gathering, when one relative lingered too long by the safe, at the last holiday, when another asked too many questions about the estate. Small moments, dismissed at the time, now stitched together into a pattern I couldn't ignore. And if my neighbor was, right, if the inheritance meeting was not just business, but a stage for betrayal, then my daughter wasn't simply walking into a room. She was walking into a trap designed long before this morning. I gripped the wheel tighter, my heart pounding like a drum inside my chest. Knowing I had a choice, pretend this was paranoia and go forward blindly. Or believe him and prepare for war. Because this wasn't just an inheritance. This was a battle for survival. And I could already feel the walls closing in. Asterisk, the street felt colder now, though the morning sun was breaking through the clouds. It wasn't the weather. It was. His words, they clung to me like frost, numbing my fingers, tightening my chest, making every second feel like a countdown I didn't know how to stop. I thought of the meeting ahead, the polished boardroom table, the neatly pressed suits, the sound of pens, scratching across papers that carried more power than weapons. And seated around that table, people I had known, people I had trusted. People who wore the mask of family, of friendship, but who, according to my neighbor, were nothing but wolves circling prey. And then, just as I opened my mouth to demand names, he leaned closer, lowering his voice so much I had to strain to hear. His eyes locked onto mine, steady, unwavering. "There's one you should watch more than the others," he said slowly. The words hollowed me out. One, not a nameless group, not an invisible threat. One person, someone I would recognize. Someone close enough to hurt us not from the outside, but from within. I shook my head, my pulse racing. Who? Who are you talking about?" My voice cracked, the question breaking out of me like a cry for help. He hesitated. And that hesitation was worse than an answer, 'cause hesitation meant this name, this truth, was too dangerous to speak. Openly, his gaze flicked to the house across the street, then back to me, as if invisible eyes were watching us even here. In the quiet of a suburban morning, finally he spoke. "It's someone she trusts," he whispered. "Someone she would never suspect. That's what makes them so dangerous." The ground seemed to shift beneath me. My daughter. She trusted so few people, a short circle, carefully chosen handful. And if one of them, just one, was betraying her, then she was more vulnerable than I had ever allowed myself to believe. Faces rushed through my mind like a storm. The family lawyer who had dined at our table for years. The cousin who suddenly reappeared after decades of silence. The friend who lingered too long on every question about assets, estates, hidden accounts. Each face wore a smile in my memory. But now those smiles felt sharper, hungrier, like masks hiding teeth. I pressed my hand to my temple, trying to think, trying to breathe. "You need to tell me who it is," I said, my tone desperate now. "If you know, you can't just hint at it. You can't leave me blind." But he only shook his head slowly, his jaw tight. "If I say the name here, it won't just put her at risk. It will put you at risk too. There are ears everywhere." The way he said it made my stomach twist. Ears everywhere. Could they already know he was speaking to me? Could they be watching right now? Through a window? Through a car parked on the corner? Through the very silence that pressed down on us? I looked around, suddenly aware of every detail, the mailman lingering at the end of the block. The curtain shifting slightly in the house across the street. The low hum of an engine idling. Somewhere nearby. Were they coincidences or signs? My neighbor's hand tapped the edge of the window. A subtle, nervous rhythm, as though urging me to make a decision before it was too late. "You'll see it for yourself," he said. When they speak at the meeting, when they smile, when they lean just a little too close, you'll feel it. Trust that feeling. I wanted to scream. I wanted the name, the face, the certainty. But instead, I was left with shadows and warnings, with a half-truth that only deepened the fear in my chest. Still, there was something in his tone, in the gravity of his words, that told me this wasn't paranoia. This wasn't fantasy. This was real. And if I ignored it, if I walked into that room blind, I might lose more than just money or property. I might lose my daughter, not my neighbor's eyes, soften for a brief moment. Pity returning to his gaze. And then, almost too quietly to hear, he added one last clue. "They're closer to her than you are." The words landed like a blade through the ribs. Closer than me. My breath caught. My world tilted. Because if that was true, then the betrayal wasn't distant, it wasn't abstract, it was intimate. Was already in her life, already in her ear, already weaving itself into her trust. And I realized, with a clarity that chilled me, that my daughter's danger wasn't just in the meeting. We were heading to, 'twas in the people she loved. And one of them was about to tear everything apart. I sat there in silence, long after my neighbor pulled back, long after his figure slipped away down the street like a ghost retreating into the shadows. His words echoed inside me, refusing to fade. "They're closer to her than you are." I should have started the car immediately, But I didn't. My fingers hovered over the key, trembling. My chest tightened with every second that passed. I felt like a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, staring down into the abyss, knowing that the moment I moved forward, I would fall into something I could never climb out of again. And yet, I turned the key. The engine roared to life, masking the sound of my heartbeat. But it didn't silence the fear. No, the fear grew louder, louder than the rumble beneath the hood. Louder than the hiss of air rushing through the vents, the drive. To the meeting blurred around me. Houses slipped past. Trees bent in the wind. Traffic lights blinked red and green and red again. But I barely saw any of it. All I saw were faces. My daughter's face, trusting, innocent, unguarded. The faces of those who would be waiting at that long, polished table. Their smiles practiced, their handshakes firm, their eyes too sharp to ever belong to friends. I gripped the wheel tighter, whispering to myself, "Stay calm. Watch closely. Don't let them see your fear." But inside, I was unraveling. Because how do you walk into a room knowing betrayal is already seated at the table? How do you protect your child when the danger is hiding in the very faces she trusts? By the time I pulled into the parking lot, the sky had darkened. Clouds had gathered thick and heavy, blotting out the light, pressing low as if the heavens themselves were leaning down to witness what was about to unfold. I parked the car, though for a long moment I couldn't bring myself to open the door. My neighbor's warning replayed again and again. One of them is closer to her than you are. The thought sickened me, quake clawed at my chest, gnawed at my gut. Finally, I forced myself out, my heels clicking against the asphalt like gunshots in the silence. The building loomed ahead-tall glass windows, reflective and cold, like eyes staring down at me, daring me to enter. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and stale coffee. The marble floor gleamed, but beneath the shine I could feel something darker, as though secrets had seeped into the very stone. My reflection in the glass doors looked pale, tense, like a stranger walking into her own life. I signed in at the desk, my name scrawled across the paper, shaking more than I wanted to admit. The receptionist smiled politely, but I caught the flicker of something colder behind her eyes, like she knew more than she let on. Or maybe I was seeing enemies where there were none. But the doubt had been planted, and it grew with every breath. The elevator ride was suffocating. The mirrored walls reflected my fear back at me a dozen times, surrounding me with versions of myself I barely recognized. My daughter's face flashed in my mind again. I whispered her name under my breath, like a prayer. And then the doors opened. The conference room stretched before me, long and elegant, with a table that seemed endless. Papers and pens were arranged neatly at every seat. Glasses of water filled just to the brim, waiting. And around that table, they were already there, the relatives, the lawyers, the so-called friends, smiling, polished, their eyes flicked up when I entered, scanning me, reading me, calculating me. My neighbor had been right. There was a shift in the air, a coldness I could feel crawling across my skin. I walked forward, my footsteps echoing against the floor, and I felt it with every fiber of my being. Not everyone in that room wanted what was best for my daughter. Not everyone was there to protect her future. Some of them were there to devour it. I glanced around, searching their faces, desperate to catch the flicker of hunger my neighbor had warned me about. And as I scanned them one by one, I saw it. Not in all, but in some. The subtle curl of a smile too controlled, the gleam in an eye too sharp. The way a hand lingered on a document as if claiming it already, and then my gaze fell on one face. One face that stopped my breath. One face too close to her. The neighbor was right. I didn't need him to say the name. I could feel it. I could see it. The betrayal had already begun. Asterisk, the room was heavy with silence, broken only by the shuffle of papers and the faint clink of glass as water was poured. I slid into my chair, the leather stiff and unwelcoming, and tried to steady my breath. My daughter sat just a few seats away, her face calm, unaware, her hands folded neatly on the table. She looked so young, so unprepared for the storm swirling invisibly around her. And then saw the face again, the one that had stopped me cold the moment I entered, the one that confirmed everything my neighbor had warned me about. The betrayer. They were smiling, of course they were smiling, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes, polished, practiced, a mask. And as their gaze swept across the table, it landed on me, and for a fraction of a second, the mask slipped at it. Was only an instant, a flicker, a sharpness in the eyes, a glint of calculation. But it was enough, enough to send a chill racing down my spine. They leaned forward, papers neatly arranged before them, and spoke with a voice so smooth it almost disguised the venom underneath. "I'm glad you're here," they said. "It's important we all move forward as a family." Family? The word twisted in my stomach. It was spoken like an invitation, but it felt more like a trap. I forced a thin smile, nodding, though my throat burned with unspoken words. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, keeping my tone even calm. But inside, I was unraveling. Every syllable that left their mouth felt like a game of chess. Every glance like a move on the board. They shifted their gaze to my daughter then, softening their expression, their voice dripping with a warmth so convincing it could have fooled anyone but me. "You've grown into such a remarkable young woman," they said to her. "Your father would be proud. He wanted nothing more than to see you taken care of." My daughter smiled faintly, lowering her eyes. She believed it. She believed them. And that was the most dangerous part. I clenched my fists under the table, nails digging into my palms. The neighbor's warning thundered in my mind. "Closer to her than you are." And here they were, speaking to her with the intimacy of trust, weaving their poison into her heart with every carefully chosen word. The lawyer, at the head of the table, cleared his throat, shuffling documents. "Shall we begin?" he asked. A chorus of nods circled the table, pens lifted, papers slid forward. But the betrayer's eyes never left my daughter. Even as they nodded, even as they reached for their glass of water, their attention clung to her like a shadow. And then, in a moment so small it could have been missed, they leaned closer to her, their voice low, almost conspiratorial. "Don't worry," they whispered. "I'll guide you through all of this. You don't need to stress about the details." The words were gentle, soothing on the surface, but to me, they were daggers. Guide you through all of this. It wasn't guidance, it was control. It was influence. It was a hand tightening around her choices before she even knew they were being taken away. My daughter nodded, relieved, grateful even, and I wanted to scream, wanted to reach across the table, to rip the mask from their face, to shout the truth my neighbor had handed me on the street. But I couldn't, not yet, not without proof. Not without tearing apart everything in a moment that would leave us exposed, vulnerable, defenseless. So I sat there, heart pounding, smile frozen in place, while the betrayer whispered comfort into my daughter's ear. I'd realized something terrible. This wasn't just a meeting about inheritance. This was a performance, a stage where trust would be broken, where every gesture was rehearsed, where betrayal would be signed and sealed with ink on paper. And if I didn't act carefully, deliberately, my daughter would walk out of this room bound by chains. She couldn't even see. The lawyer's voice droned on, outlining figures, terms, percentages, but I barely heard him. All I heard was the echo of my neighbor's warning. All I saw was the predator sitting just a few seats away, smiling, whispering, waiting, and in that moment I made a silent vow. I wouldn't let them win. Not today. Not ever. The lawyer's voice filled the room like a steady drumbeat, echoing off the walls, each word about numbers and assets and percentages ringing hollow in my ears. I should have been listening, should have been focused on the details, but my attention was trapped elsewhere. Every time the betrayer leaned toward my daughter, every time they smiled or whispered something only she could hear, my pulse quickened. It was subtle, too subtle for anyone else to notice, but to me, it was unmistakable. They weren't just guiding her. They were steering her. Every nod, every hesitant signature, every glance for reassurance was drawn not from her own understanding, but from the quiet, calculated manipulations of the one seated at her side. I forced myself to breathe evenly, to keep my mask intact, because the moment I revealed what I knew, the moment I lashed out or accused without proof, everything would collapse. My daughter would defend them. She would see me not as her protector, but as the paranoid woman interrupting her chance at independence. And that would hand the betrayer exactly what they wanted: control without resistance. So I watched closely the shuffle of papers, the subtle exchange of glances between the betrayer and one of the lawyers, the way their hand lingered just a second too long over the page my daughter was meant to sign, as though claiming it already belonged to them. The room was a performance, but I had learned to read performances. And beneath the polished surface, the cracks were there, tiny but deep. When the documents were passed to my daughter, I saw it happen. The betrayer leaned closer, lowering their voice just enough to seem like reassurance, yet loud enough that I caught the words, "Just sign here. It's all straightforward. Nothing to worry about. Nothing to worry about." But I did worry. Because in that moment, I saw the line of text my daughter's pen hovered over, and my blood turned to ice. Clause buried deep in legal language, one that would shift not just money, but power, control, decision-making authority. My daughter wasn't just about to sign away assets. She was about to sign away herself. My chair scraped against the floor as I leaned forward, my voice cutting through the heavy air sharper than I intended. Wait, every head turned. Betrayer's mask didn't falter, not immediately. They smiled, poised, calm. But I saw it. The flicker of annoyance in their eyes, the quick tightening of their jaw. For the first time, the performance cracked. I reached across the table, pointing to the clause. My voice trembled, but I didn't let it break. This isn't just about inheritance. It's about control. She signs this, she won't be free to make her own choices. She'll be bound to someone else's decisions. Isn't that right? The room fell silent. The lawyer hesitated, fumbling with his papers. The betrayers shifted in their seat, clearing their throat, their voice smooth. But edged now? You're overcomplicating things. It's standard legal language. Nothing unusual, but I knew better. And for the first time, so did my daughter. I saw it in her eyes, the hesitation, the flicker of doubt. She looked at me, then at them. And for the briefest moment, she pulled her hand back from the page. It wasn't victory. Not yet. But it was enough. The meeting pressed on, words exchanged, documents shuffled. The performance continuing as though nothing had broken. But I knew something had shifted. My daughter had seen behind the mask just enough to question, just enough to pause, and I sat there, spine straight, heart steady. No longer just a mother caught in fear, but a woman preparing for war. Because the neighbor was right. Betrayal had already found its way into our family. But they had underestimated me. And if they thought I would stay silent while my daughter's future was stolen from her, they were wrong, dead wrong.